My parents, they don't love me. They never have. They love my brother, and that's basically all they love, because they didn't want me to be born. They made it very, very clear to me. And guys, the only reason I'm even here today is because of my grandparents. Well, guess what? All the years of abuse are about to turn around and karma's coming for them, because my grandpa just discovered something. Yeah, I collapsed. I haven't been fed properly, and I wasn't allowed food. So now everything is coming to light, and I'm going to tell you all about it. Hey there, I've been called the human monster by my own brother. I'm 16 years of age, of comfortable parents. I have a brother called Tony, and he's an only child. See, my parents wished that they ever had just him. I wasn't meant to come into this world. My parents, after learning that my mother was pregnant with me, decided to get rid of me. But there was complications with that, and my mother almost lost her life, so she had no other option than to keep me. Besides, the fact that they only watched a child, and I had almost cost my mother her life, the birth process was really painful, and that contributed to the hatred my parents bore towards me. As though that was not enough, I was now born with a birth defect known as macrocephaly, a condition of an unusually big head. My condition was not so severe, but it was enough to make my parents embarrassed about me. I was not allowed to have a social life, and they did not send me to school on time. My grandparents had a clothing brand called Vivox, and Grandpa had asked my father to take over the managerial position while he watched from the sidelines. The brand is doing very well, and my grandparents are the only one who consider me to be a human being. I was 6 years old when I went to spend my first and only vacation with them. Well, they were the ones who had actually asked my parents to send me over, and my parents happily did so. I've only felt needed once in all my life, and the vacation with my grandparents was at one time. See, I was free and open when I was with my grandparents. I spent most of my time asking Grandpa questions about things that seemed curious to me, and he always just had a way of giving me the answer in such a manner that I could grasp what he was trying to say. It was during one of those times that I asked him when I would start going to school like my older brother Tony. My grandparents were shocked at that age of 6. I've never seen the four walls of a school. See, Grandpa gave me a soothing response by saying that I would soon be going to school, but I never knew that he planned to take it up with my parents. My grandparents waited for the day when my parents would come and pick me up so they could address the issue with them. My parents came and acted as if they've missed me, and I knew it was all a play because I would be neglected from the very moment I got into the car. My grandparents asked them to sit as they wanted to discuss something of importance with them. They asked him why I had not started school. The question came as a shock to my parents, but being the seasoned actors that they were, they quickly cooked up a lie and just sold it to my grandparents. My parents told Grandpa that they were just not sure sending me to school was the best thing to do, as they were still observing how deeply my condition had affected them. My grandpa did not buy that crap. He noted that he had spoken with me and that it was crystal clear. My condition did not affect my IQ in any way. So, he then asked if they were not undermining me in any way, but my parents noted that they were not. My father then claimed that their reluctance to send me to school was in my own best interest. They explained that kids like me would usually get picked on in school, and they did not want me to face such treatment. If only grandparents knew that I suffered worse at the hands of my parents. Grandpa told my parents that there was no viable excuse to keep me from school. He noted that it was their duty to stand up for me in a case, like this ever arose. My parents even promised to send me to school as soon as possible, and we left my grandparents' home that day, but it was just like I said. They verbally came at me in the car all the way home. Anyways, they fulfilled their promise of sending me to school, but they did not stand up for me in times when it mattered. They made sure that it was the last time I ever went to visit grandparents' house, as they would always make excuse after excuse of me being occupied with my academics. I was picked on at school, and I did not have any friends. My parents never asked me for once how I was doing in school. I did my best to ignore the maltreatment at home and the bullying in school, But it got to a point when I engaged in a fight with a student during my junior high school days. I unleashed the bottle of anger from all of my life, and it had to take the teachers to separate us. The funny part is, it was a boy who was 2 years older than me, but I've beaten him up like my life depended on it. My parents were immediately called to the school, and both the bully and I were suspended for 2 weeks. So, my parents, they apologized to the principal. They claimed that they had raised me better and assured the principal that such repetition would not occur. We got to the house and my parents absolutely scolded me for an embarrassment to them, not just with my look alone, but with my attitude. My mother said that she knew it was a terrible idea to have sent me to school in the first place, and I tried to explain that I was pushed to the edge, but their hatred for me made them deaf to what I was saying. My mother said I was bad as I looked, before dragging me to my room and shutting the door. I didn't eat for the rest of the day. I honestly just sat there crying until I couldn't cry another drop. My older brother Tony saw this, and he's been witnessing the neglect which I suffered at the hands of our parents, but he said and did nothing. He even kept his distance away from me because he enjoyed the privilege and attention that he got from our parents. His birthdays and all that concerned him were always celebrated while I was ignored like I simply did not exist. I lived a lonely life, even while being surrounded by people. It soon became the norm for my parents to lock me up when they wanted to keep me from being seen by rich colleagues who came to visit. They soon established a relationship with one of those rich folk, and this rich folk had a son who was about the same age as my older brother Tony. He would always come over to the house, and the two boys would spend time doing whatever pleased them. Anyone who did not closely know my family would mistake me for a maid once they visited the house for the first time, and I don't blame them, because my family are the ones who projected that impression. See, my parents were comfortable, but I always appeared shabby. Tony's friends had come over to the house today, and our parents were not around. They started off on their normal routine, which was to play a video game and turn the house upside down. Tony's friend was way worse than him when it came to being ill-mannered. I got out of my room to go and make myself some cereal, and I discovered that Tony had gone to the toilet to relieve himself while his friend was all alone in the sitting room. I greeted his friend before going ahead to prepare a cereal when his friend echoed the words, "Hey, you, girl." Well, I turned and he asked in a very entitled manner that I got him a glass of water to drink. I felt disrespected, but I overlooked it and went to get him a glass of water. So, rather than getting a thank you, he asked me to go make him some cereal too. The entitlement was at its peak and I was not having it, so I told him to go make it himself. I turned to leave when I felt that splash of cold water all over me, and I heard him shout at me for talking to him without respect. You know what kind of anger you have that makes you react without first thinking, right? Well, that was exactly the kind of anger that was flowing through my bones. I immediately returned the favor by pouring the cereal in my hand all over his face and a fight ensued. Tony's friends overpowered me within seconds. Not knowing what else to do, I immediately reached for a bottle of soda that was just lying on the table and landed it on its head. Tony's friends gave out a loud cry, fell off of me, and he was bleeding profusely. Even I, who had inflicted such pain on his friend, was equally shaken. Tony immediately appeared on the scene, took the phone, and called our parents to tell them what happened. See, our parents came home and took the boy to the hospital where he had his head stitched. The parents of the boy were not happy with my parents, and they did not bother to ask what had caused their son to fight a girl in the first place. I knew my parents would not be happy with me, but I felt that they would understand once I told them what happened. My parents came back home, and I'm telling you, it was hell. Without even asking me what happened, my mother descended upon me. My father and Tony stood by my side and watched as my mom beat me so hard that I felt I would die there. My mother momentarily paused to ask me why I had decided to consistently embarrass them, and have even taken it up to a notch this time by ruining their relationship with their rich friends. I explained to my parents what had transpired between Tony's friends and me, but my response only angered my parents all the more. My mother, she pounced on me and gave me another round of serious beatings, while saying that I could have avoided the drama if I had just obeyed the instruction which Tony's friends had given. Even you would agree that the partially my parents exhibited between me and anyone has always been glaring. I was locked in my room where I'm currently writing this. I mean, how can one's family hate the person so much? Is it my fault that I was born with a defect? Is that what my life is permanently going to look like? What would you do if you guys were finding yourself in my shoes? What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Today's story is a wild one. I can't imagine being born into a family who just absolutely despises you because they didn't want you. And basically because you were born a little different. Guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your response. And if you're new to the channel, I drop a video every single day, so consider subscribing. It only takes a second, and it does support the channel a lot. I have multiple updates, so let's go ahead and jump into the first one. Update number 1. My parents recently redecorated my room to match that of a princess. Don't get excited for me because, as you would have already learned by now, my parents do not have my best interest in heart. After the saga where I broke someone's head with the bottle, my parents decided to treat me worse than they've been doing. I've been doing the cleaning and every jab there was at home, but when it came to eating, I was not permitted to join them at the dining table. I had to eat my food in my room, but it grew worse. I noted during my last update that my parents had locked me up in my room and I was not given any food for 3 days. When they finally decided to give it to me, I was made to eat half of what I regularly am used to. So I grew weak as the days passed, and I was eating less and less and was still expected to keep on doing the level of work that I've been doing all along. I could not complain, as it would only earn me another round of beating and worse fate than I was already experiencing. Grandpa had surprisingly showed up one day to check up on his grandchildren, and my mother came to me from my room. She had me dressed properly and demanded I act as though everything was okay, otherwise she would make sure she dealt with me once my grandparents had left. I came before my grandparents and they began to ask how I was doing. So I claimed that I was alright, but that was all that I really remember. I opened my eyes 3 days later to find myself surrounded by hospital beds, by my parents and grandparents. They all seemed relieved that I didn't die. My mom was all over the place making sure that I was alright. This was the best that they've ever treated me, and it made the whole thing more painful because it took me almost losing my life to be treated right by them. Even though I knew that they were just pretending, I wanted to be alone, so I just closed my eyes like I wanted to sleep, and I heard my grandpa ask my parents how things had gotten so bad to the point of me collapsing. My parents, they told a big old fat lie that it almost opened up my eyes for. They said that recently I had always been by myself and would not want anyone around. I listened as my mother told Grandpa that she's even approached me on several occasions to ask why I was trying to live like a recluse, but I had told her that there's no problem with it. My mother, at that point, broke down in tears when she continued by saying it was like a nightmare for her when I had collapsed before their own eyes. My father, he starts to console her and suggested they all leave the room as I was trying to get some shut-eye. I opened up my eyes at that very moment and I heard the doors shut from behind, and I wondered at the hypocrisy of my parents. They had just lied to save themselves, huh? If only Grandpa knew that I would have been dead if he didn't visit that day. My grandmother decided to stay with me right there at the hospital till I was discharged, and I was grateful, because I knew that the second that they were gone, my parents would revert to the original bitterness towards me. The day came when I was, to be discharged from the hospital. The whole family was there to take me home. We got to the house, and the first thing I noticed was that it was decorated. There was a welcome home sign there, can you believe it? So I got to my room, and it was all sorts of shades of pink. They helped me to get settled in, and grandparents decided to engage me in conversation for a while. Grandpa began by suggesting that I would come and spend time at their place, but my parents, who did not want me to be left alone with them, as I could tell them all that had happened, said it was a good idea, but I need to fully recover first. Before my mother was done with what she was saying, my grandma saw some marks on my body, which were inflicted on me by my mom. Remember that? And she took everyone's attention there. Grandpa, who could not hide the shock, asked if I was going through any form of challenges and needed to talk to someone. He tried persuading me to open up, as they were all there for me. My father, who knew what was at stake if I spoke, immediately cut in. He told Grandpa that it was exactly what they had said in the hospital. Grandpa insisted that there had to be some external factors which were pushing me towards living the life of a recluse. It was something my parents needed to find a way of getting me to divulge, otherwise it would only get worse if not dealt with. So, I just stared in silence as my parents acted like they did not know the true reason for my recent weight loss. My mom immediately shifted the focus. She noted that the important things was to help me recover, and that the rest could follow suit later. My grandparents were about to leave when I spoke up. I told my grandma, as I called her, to please stay with me for a few more days. My mom, she tried to stand in the way. She even claimed that my grandma had a lot to do, and that if she did not go back with my grandpa, then there would be no one to take care of him. Grandma, she dismissed my mother's talk. She decided she was going to stay behind to see that I was properly nursed back to health. Besides, she noted that there were lots of workers at their home who could attend to Grandpa. She even stated that another alternative would be to take me along with them, but this was something my parents would not allow, because they would rather have me in the house where they could manage the situation, as their presence could refrain me from speaking, than have me follow my grandparents to their home, where I could easily spill the beans on everything that's been happening. My grandma is currently staying with me, and she even sleeps in my room. I do hope that this makes things better for me. I'll update you guys in just a little bit. What's up, guys? Mr. Redditso here. We're about to hop into update 2. I just want to touch on what the heck is happening. A lot of the comments from the original post and the first update, they're questioning why isn't OP just spitting out the truth and letting the grandparents help? Well, we might get a little insight on that, so let's go ahead and start with update 2. If you guys are enjoying today's story, make sure you hit that like button. Here is your update number 2. It's finally happened. My parents are now in the bad books of my grandparents. This update is coming 2 months after the last one. My grandmother helped me in the recovery process, and I had a wonderful time while she was around. Besides the fact that she pampered me like I was a 2-year-old, her presence made my parents stay off my back and even act nice towards me. I didn't tell her the reason why I had collapsed, but I promised her that I was not going to happen again. Grandma knew how to spoil me, and I ate every delicious thing that came my way. I fully recovered a week later, and my grandmother had to go. The nights before Grandma left, she promised she and my grandfather would always check up on me to see how I was doing. It was sad to see her leave, and I would have persuaded her to stay if I could, because I only felt safe when she was here. She left on a weekend, so my parents and Tony were around. We all said our goodbyes, and the moment the driver, who by the way came to pick up grandmother, drove off, my mother turned to me and said it was the end of all the princess treatment, and that I was receiving this for no reason, and she meant it, because things reverted back to how they were almost instantly. Well, guys, I was angry, but I had gotten used to their attitude, so I just endured and started to build resentment all over again. Well, all hell broke loose yesterday, which happened to be my birthday. I knew I had turned 17, but I was not elated about it. And this is because it was going to be like every other day for me, if not worse. I went about doing the chores in the house with nobody. My parents or my brother bothering to wish me a happy birthday. When I even think about it, I can't remember if they ever wished or celebrated my birthday once. Well, it turned out that my birthday was not going to be like the rest. Oh no! My grandparents, they surprisingly showed up at our home with lots and lots of gifts. I never expected them to know or even keep my birthday at heart. They were intentional about making me feel loved, and I cried. I cried as I looked at all the covered boxes of different shapes and sizes that they had brought for me. My parents, who were there, immediately said that my grandparents had ruined the surprise which they had planned for me. Yada, yada, yada. I knew they were lying, just to save their face, of course, and I did not care, though, because my grandparents just made my day. I excitedly began to carry my boxes alone to my room, while my brother Tony looked on in jealousy. Grandpa promised him, however, that they had a surprise for him on his birthday. So, after I was done taking the boxes to my room, I began to unpack them, and that was when my brother showed up. He began to mock me, but I told him that he's just a jealous boy, so I won't waste time being bitter. He then asked me to enjoy my day while it lasted because it would obviously take another year before I ever get a gift from anybody again. So I asked him to get out, while I do enjoy my day in peace. Well, he lost his temper and attacked me. We began to fight and roll around on the floor, hitting the boxes that grandmother just brought for me, and the noise which generated from it caught their attention and they all rushed to the scene. After they had broken us up, my mother began to talk about how they had raised me better, that I was behaving like this. She claimed that they taught me over time I needed to respect my brother since he was older. Well, guys, obviously at that point I couldn't hold it on anymore, so I lost it. I asked my parents what I've done to them to make them hate me so much. I asked why they did not just give me up for adoption, as my life would have been better, because even if they kept me in their home, I had been pretty much neglected by them ever since I was born. Everybody, including my parents, was surprised at my outburst. I did it. They never expected that I would react this way. I began to recall the whole injustice that's been meted out to me in the house, and how they preferred my brother over me, and my grandparents were absolutely shocked to the core. My parents tried to shut me up by calming me down, but you know what? I refused. I told them that I had enough of them treating me right when my grandparents were around, only to revert to abandoning me the second they leave. My father at this point wanted to shut me up, but Grandpa asked to let me speak. Well, I began to cry, seriously, as I told my grandparents the actual reason why I collapsed that day, and they just stared at my grandparents with so much shock, they couldn't even talk. After I had poured out my heart and soul and frustration, I ran out of the house and I did not know where to go. So I just sat outside and cried my little eyes out. My grandparents did not say anything to my parents, who tried to explain. They just came after me and took me to their home, and I'm currently here right now at my grandparents' place, but we've not spoken ever since yesterday. I guess they just want me to catch my breath, have a breather first before confronting me about it. Anyways, I'll update you once I figure some things out. Final updates. Update number 3. Hey, my grandparents have exerted the perfect revenge on my parents. My grandparents and I spoke shortly after my last update. They asked me to tell them everything that's been going on in my life, and my grandmother broke down as I narrated my sad ordeal. See, Grandpa praised me and noted that I was really strong to have gone through all this alone, as most people in my position would have given up a long time ago. He promised that everything was going to be all right, and Grandpa immediately called his lawyer and noted that he wanted to file a lawsuit against his son and daughter-in-law. The day the lawyer came to inform Grandpa that the paperwork has been drafted was the day my parents came with my brother Tony to come and beg for forgiveness. See, my grandparents were absolutely furious at them. They asked how could they have meted out such a level of wickedness to an innocent person who was their very own blood, nonetheless. My parents, who knew that Grandpa could wreak their lives with havoc in a second, immediately began to beg for forgiveness. They claimed that they were now ready to be the parents which they never were. My parents were on their knees, begging But my brother Tony was seated like he didn't have a care in the world. So the lawyer walks into the parlor, right? And this is when things get really heated. Well, all of them and Grandpa said, "Hey, a lawsuit has been filed." Grandpa told my parents that the next time we would see them would be in a court, and they intensified their plea. Grandpa, who was obviously disgusted by Tony's lack of, attitude, pointed out to my parents that he was going to be the reason why he made sure that they ended up in jail. At least Tony would be forced to go out and face the world as his own. So my father immediately gave Tony a dirty little slap, and he joined them on their knees to plead for mercy. He walked on his knees, even, and held Grandpa by the feet, almost wanting to kiss him, while pleading, asking for mercy, as he did not want to spend the rest of his life in a jail cell. Grandpa noted that the one who was offended, me, by the way, was the one whose forgiveness should be sought, and both my parents and Tony immediately started asking me for forgiveness. Well, obviously, I didn't say a word to them because I knew that they were just begging to save themselves from going to jail. Grandpa then said that the only way he would drop the charges against them was if we settled out of court on his terms. So my grandparents, were going to do this one way or the other, and my parents were just eager to hear the terms, and so Grandpa said that they were to give me up for adoption, as he wanted to adopt me and pay me a certain amount of money as a compensation for everything that they put me through. After all, he reminded them that he had on several occasions sent huge amounts of monies to them to support them, and taking good care of me, a job that they clearly failed to do. The amount that my grandparents were demanding as my compensation was $20,000. My parents noted that it's too much, but you know what? They're willing to abide by his demands. The money was paid, and my parents allowed him to adopt me. Well, after everything was settled, my grandparents invited my family over to the house, and my parents could not even say no, because, besides Grandpa being my dad's father, he was equally their boss, at the family business and all. So my parents showed up with Tony. My grandparents and I were already seated at the parlor when they arrived. They attempted to sit down, but Grandpa stopped them. He asked them to remain standing as he was not going to take much of their time. Grandpa, he re-emphasized his disappointment at our parents and told them that the fact that they were willing to give me up for adoption just to save themselves from going to jail showed that there was zero love in their hearts towards me, and it did not matter to them that they could no longer refer to me as their child. Grandpa went ahead to say that even though the matter has been settled out of court, and obviously the charges have been dropped, there was still one last thing to do. Guys, he handed my parents an envelope and asked them to open it. So my parents popped it open, and there was a sack letter. He told them that they were never to be seen anywhere around the company premises, otherwise they would be arrested. My parents fell to their feet one more time. They were getting good at this. But that was not the only thing that Grandpa had in store. He told them, my father, my mother, and my brother, they had, stricken their name off the will and made me the sole heir of all that he owned. This was a nice move by Grandpa, and he had taken a huge chunk of money from them during the settlement and equally stripped them of their position just to make sure that they were quickly, broke. My parents tried to plead and beg, but my grandfather just immediately called the house security to come and throw them out on their feet. I watched with satisfaction as my family was kicked out, and I believed you would not call me a bad person at this point if you've been following my story thus far. I've started a new life with my grandparents, and it's very much different and more comfortable than what my previous life was with my parents. Or ex-parents is a word that I like to use. Anyways, that's it, guys. This is just a classic karma story. I mean, come on. How can you treat your own kid absolutely despicably and like you just hate him? It makes no sense to me why OP had to go through so much trauma. It was ridiculous. Thank goodness OP, she had her grandparents to back her up, and that's who she truly needed. Let me know in the comment section down below, What do you think of the grandpa's response when he basically says, you guys are out of the will, you're fired from the family company, and I'm done with you? Let me know your thoughts on that. I think it was the right play because, well, OP's parents weren't just neglecting her, they were severely abusing her. We're talking about hiding, well, food from her, keeping her in her room, and eventually she couldn't take it and her body collapsed. Guys, I want to know your thoughts and input on it. My name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories like this every day. And if you guys want to see more daily videos like this, consider subscribing. Only like, 22% I think it was, of the viewers are actually subscribed. So it does really help support if you hit that button. Guys, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. And of course, remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.